Behold, the golden fool. Praise him, for he is wise. Accept the eyes and smile, but do not lust for his hands. More than jealous of himself, his love and lover he plots, his immortality. He peddles even now the green myths of his times. They may tarnish with your eyes. He is the myth. He was the boy.
Well, Doug was this very gentle soul, in a sense. He had gorgeous blonde hair. When you saw Doug, you knew that you saw Doug because he was not flamboyant, but he was alive and a lot of fun. But at the same time, he was thoughtful and brilliant and socially engaging and politically engaging. And I think for all of us at the time, we were interested in philosophy, we were interested in politics, we were interested in culture and the arts, and we wanted to, in a sense, change society because we were going into the early 70s, and here we found ourselves at the University of Saskatchewan.
Well, I first heard about Doug Wilson in 1997 when I attended the University of Saskatchewan's Doug Wilson Award ceremony. And I was quite impressed that the University of Saskatchewan had an award for contributions to foster gay and lesbian life on campus, and so attended the awards ceremony. And in the booklet there was a little blurb about Doug Wilson and a copy of his ad in the Sheaf, which is the University of Saskatchewan student newspaper. And it was a very tame ad that indicated that he was going to start a campus gay group, and basically outlined his name and gave his College of Education mailbox number. And that was really the fateful mistake, because the publication of that ad propelled Doug Wilson into a whole series of conflicts with the university administration, and ultimately would make him a gay activist in Saskatchewan and nationally.
What I remember about Doug growing up was we used to go down to the slough and we'd look at birds, and always he was finding things and taking me off and showing me. Remember he found a beaver dam one time, and we traipsed probably about 3 miles through fields and stuff, and we'd lie there and wait for the beavers to come out. And one time we found a baby skunk, and he brought it home, and we kept it for about 1.5 years. He had this thing that he was going to hypnotize the chickens. And he did, you know. He knew how to hypnotize the chickens. Oh, silly things, you know. We had to make our own entertainment. There wasn't really much happening there. He was always on some other level, though, than the other kids, always. He was always reading. He just devoured books. Even though we lived on the farm, we always got the newspapers, we got magazines. Our house was full of books. My mom and dad and my grandmother were also very interested in that type of thing, so we were all raised like that. Even as a young kid, he was always really connected with adults, like at the same level as an adult, not like a child.
Well, he was an intellectual kind of guy. He wasn't a hands-on, he wasn't going to be a welder or a truck driver or anything like that. So, he was more of a, like to debate and think of the philosophy of things, I guess.
He wasn't very mechanically inclined, and my father had more expectations of him being a farmer. Doug loved the farm, but he didn't meet my dad's expectations a lot of times, so there's a lot of frustration. I remember him twining the harrows around the power pole. We got in a new granary, and Dad was off somewhere, and Doug was supposed to unload the grain into the granary, and he comes up and he says, "Nancy, I backed into the granary."
I know he went and hid out in the pasture for a day after he ran back the truck through the side of the granary.
The main thing I remember is that he would be very frustrated a lot of times. We went to a one-room country schoolhouse. My grandmother had donated the land and had the schoolhouse built. He took grade 2 and 3 together, grade 2 the first half, grade 3 the second half, and I think maybe grade 5 and 6 he took together in 1 year. So he had 2 sets of grades that he had streamed through. So
High school. The quick, hot love of young ones. Lusting. Conversations littered with innuendo. The spontaneous erections of adolescence. Tight and awkward in my jeans. Trapping me in my desk.
I think he told me first because when he came back from Europe, he came to see me the night after, I guess it was, and he told me that he had found out he was bisexual. And I asked him what that meant, and he told me, and, you know, didn't make any difference. And then my parents didn't find out until, I think he actually wrote them a letter. They were frantic. After he came out, there was always, you know, a barrier up between my dad and him, always.
Options. Changeling, Frog Prince, Court Fool, Village Idiot, Saint. In another time, the options would have been much greater. I would have had more scope. Denied such sanctuary as frog flesh or desert hermitude. Denied the hope of salvation at the imperious lips of princesses or gods. Bound by a personality, tied with flesh, circled by humanity. I'm a cripple, a victim, a slave. I celebrate it.
In many respects, he comes from a fairly conventional Saskatchewan family, came to the University of Saskatchewan in 1967 to do a Bachelor of Education degree, specialized in history and art, and seems to have excelled at his studies. He was a popular student. He went on to become the College of Education Student Union president.
That's the first time I met Doug, and we became fast friends and certainly allies in the progressive politics. I'm not sure if I knew that Doug was kind of an activist in the gay community or not. And certainly at that time, there was no gay, lesbian, bi club on campus either. And I think to assist some of the folks that were maybe struggling with some issues of, you know, their own sexuality, Doug ran an ad in the Sheaf that I never saw, and no one ever mentioned to me until the issue kind of reared its ugly head.
You know, I can't even remember the ad. It was so benign. I can't remember the ad. I can't remember seeing the ad. I can remember the result of the ad.
What happens is that the College of Education is quickly notified that one of the students has placed this ad, and Wilson is brought in for a discussion. He's told that his job has been terminated. He's told that he must apologize and rescind the ad in terms of using the College of Education mailbox, and basically given a very stern talking to about his notion that he would be publicly gay and equate public gayness or homosexuality with the College of Education.
Well, I think he was mad. I think he was mad, hurt, offended. This was an intellectual. This was a person that took his work as a teacher, as someone who was on this campus seriously. He was offended, as we all were. They were old notions about people. And I think Doug was surprised at the response.
Doug said, I can't believe it, that he'd been barred from supervising practice teachers by the dean because of his status as a openly gay person, teaching at the College of Education. So I think Doug was shocked and overwhelmed and hurt, and I think that was the first reaction.
People from all across the campus in various departments to start thinking about this. And this is a place where you're supposed to have academic freedom. And yet, Doug, who was an intellectual, an academic, a good teacher, there was no freedom for Doug.
There's a committee formed, the Committee to Defend Doug Wilson, composed of some gay faculty and students. They come from the College of Education, the College of Arts and Science in particular, but also from across campus. The Committee to Defend Doug Wilson would lodge a formal human rights complaint with the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission, and they begin to agitate on his behalf to establish a petition for people to sign to indicate that they're not in agreement with the dean's decision.
We went to the council of the university, the academic council. We went to see the president of the university. We confronted the dean of education. We picketed the convocation, the fall convocation, saying this is ridiculous. This university discriminates against students that are gay or lesbian.
10 or 15 or 20 or 30 of us out there with picket signs in front of the convocation. We thought this would be a good opportunity to tell parents and friends of graduands for that particular year what a lousy place the U of S was, and had a terrific hoot when John Diefenbaker pulled up. And so people took the opportunity to express their concern to the Chancellor of the university, Mr. Diefenbaker, about the actions of the university. So it had quite a bit of impact. Some of the most vocal kind of proponents for Doug's case and things like that were very compelling speakers. And I think people began the slow process of evaluating kind of exactly what had happened here, on what basis and things like that.
The Committee to Defend Doug Wilson condemns the actions of this university, and we will fight the decision to suspend Doug Wilson. This kind of blatant discrimination only encourages the furtiveness and shame from which homosexuals are just beginning to free themselves. The wider implications of this discriminatory act are obvious. If the leaders of our educational system are allowed to make such bigoted and arbitrary decisions unchallenged, then we deserve the narrow and oppressive school system, which is the inevitable result.
Gay rights are human rights. As gay people, we just want the rights of basic humanity. The closet is where we, as gay people, are forced, where we're brought up. From day one, from our birth, we're taught that we're sick, dirty, perverted, twisted, whatever. And that whole life of deceit, that devil life, that living in a lie, that's what the closet is. That coming out process is an endless one. Every time we meet someone new, we have to reaffirm ourselves again. We have to disclose. That's a whole strain of pressure that straight people never have to deal with. And so we cannot expect them to understand.
I think he became the focus of the issue, not only here in Saskatchewan, but all across the country. Here was a guy who was well-spoken, he looked good, he wasn't scary to look at, he wasn't scary to listen to, that was able to articulate an issue. Because obviously the issue needed to be responded to, but he also had a pretty big presence. And big personality. Now, did he revel in it? Maybe.
The war was fought on the home front too, eh? I could have, you know, at the stage of my life when it happened, I sure could have lived without the notoriety. He had supporters for what he was doing, but there was no support for his family back here.
Ultimately, Doug Wilson isn't successful with his human rights complaint because the Human Rights Board and the judge finds that although the committee and Wilson had claimed that he was a victim of gender discrimination because gender was a protected category on the Saskatchewan Human Rights Code, the lawyers for the university successfully argue that he's not discriminated against based on his gender. He's not fired because he's a man. He's fired because he's a gay man. And so that's the end of the road with that complaint. And there will be no redress from the university. And so a concerted effort is made at this point to begin activism towards achieving human rights protection in the human rights provincial codes for homosexuality.
And I remember lobbying members of the legislature to get the legislation amended, the human rights legislation amended. What was interesting is that we were one of the last provinces in the country to bring in that legislation, yet there had been people working on that for years.
After he left campus, he was unemployed for a while. There's not much employment prospects for a gay activist who's been turfed out of his TA position at the University of Saskatchewan. He becomes the president of the Saskatoon Gay Community Centre. While he's there, the feminist group is right across the hall from the Gay Community Centre. That leads to a lot of very important discussion and debate between those two groups. And one of the outcomes of it is the creation of the Saskatchewan Gay Coalition. They are the group that creates a cultural activity in the fall called Metamorphosis, which really strives to bring people from across the Prairie region to celebrate gay cultural and artistic endeavors, as well as some activism. They create a newsletter. He became a resource, and I'm amazed by the number of letters he got from complete strangers.
January 11th, 1980. Hello, people at the Saskatchewan Gay Coalition. I'm just writing to you to see if you could possibly put an ad in your newsletter so someone will write to me. I'm getting kind of lonely up here. A good bud of mine gets your newsletter and gave me your address. I'm on death row and sure lonely. I hope you can help to ease my mind some, because the future don't look too hot right now. I thank you very much and hope to be out someday to meet you all. Sincerely, Robert. McAllister, Oklahoma.
August 16th, 1979. To whom it may concern. My husband has been receiving your newsletter and is quite upset by this. He is not, nor never has been gay, and finds the whole idea sickening. We would both like to know who gave my husband's name to you. Kindly do not send any more correspondence whatsoever. Yours truly, Mrs. Bob Kitch.
November 16th, 1980. Dear friends, I'm sending you a small donation to help you in your fight for equal rights. I'm still living alone in my little 2-bedroom house in town. I'm getting old, but still in good health, and I enjoy life. If anybody is interested, they can write to me. Maybe 2 good friends living together could make life more enjoyable. I wish you continued success in your endeavors for a better life. Your loving old friend, Edna. Shaunavon, Saskatchewan.
They met in San Francisco in I believe it was 1979. Doug was there for Gay Pride, and they had a friend in common, and they were having a brunch. A friend of Peter's from Arkansas was in town. And so they're having a brunch, invited her over. And so Pete's making breakfast and the doorbell rings and he opens it up and he thinks it's going to be this woman right from Arkansas, but instead it's this blue-eyed, blonde-haired prairie boy named Doug Wilson. And it was love at first sight. They were just like together after that.
There was a connection, instantaneous connection between them. They were quite opposite in a lot of ways, because Doug was fairly quiet and Peter was boisterous, and when he walked into a room, you knew he was there. But the opposite of them worked, you know, the opposite as of them worked. Peter was quite a character, real character. I think this is how the story goes, that he had met a woman. He wanted to make immigration, so he had made arrangements with a lesbian to get married. And then his immigration officer was watching TV one day, and he was on some kind of discussion about being gay on television. He was kind of called on the carpet for that and sent back to the States. And then he eventually married Wendy Code.
He asked her if she'd be interested in auditioning for his singing group, the Quinlan Sisters, and she said yes, and then she said, "Can I bring a friend, one who can really sing?" So she invited me to the audition, and the rest is history. His first incarnation of the Quinlan Sisters he put together in San Francisco. And then when he moved to Saskatoon, then there was another incarnation, and then there was the final incarnation, which was us. No, Doug never performed. He was strictly the boss, strictly the manager. No, Pete would have been the boss, but they were both bosses. But I think what Pete and Doug did was something different, and because it was funny and it was topical. It's not like we were really famous, but certain people from a certain culture would remember us. Infamy. It's more kind of an infamy.
Are straight folks normal? That's what I want to know. Are straight folks normal? That's what I want to know. Well, my heart's in open season and my body, it's in heat. And I don't see no reason, boy, why we weren't meant to be. Though our love is a felony, I am still inclined to snuggle you right up next to me and tangle your feet into mine. But are straight folks normal? That's what I want to know. Are straight folks normal? That's what I want to know. Now the first straight folks that I knew were my mom and dad, it's true. But if you ask me, are they normal? I'd have to laugh right back at you. No, no, no. Are straight folks normal? That's what I want to know. Are straight folks normal? That's what I want to know. Now my mother says that I'm selfish. She says everything that I do is wrong. I settle down, go to work in an office. So why must you waste time writing deviant songs? But is this really deviant? That's what I want to know. Are straight folks more normal than me? I don't really think that's so. Cause I've even gotten some straight friends disillusioned with those straight trends. My sisters don't want no babies just yet, staying home for a man going crazy. My heart's in open season and my body, it's in heat. And I don't see no reason, boy, why we weren't meant to be. Though our love is a felony, I am still inclined to snuggle you right up next to me and tangle your feet into mine. Are straight folks normal? That's what I want to know. Are straight folks normal? That's what I want to know.
We were seeking fame and fortune on the great stage. Of course. Yeah, well, you know, the thing was, we had really good response. We just thought that moving to Toronto there'd be more opportunities for us. You know, you can only perform in a place for so long before you have to, like, go someplace else because your audience gets tired of you or wants new songs, or, you know, you need to travel around and get known a bit. In Toronto, you know, it really facilitated his imagination, and, you know, it was all very exciting because there were such, you know, interesting people there and doing interesting things.
Doug was serious about things, you know, he was motivated and he was so serious and about a lot of things, and Peter brought out the fun side of him. You know, like, I never knew Doug to drink. He never drank. He just sort of disapproved of drinking because my dad drank a bit more than what he should have. So it was amazing to me to see him have a few drinks, and they had wild old times, you know, that whole group of friends.
I first actually met Doug at a party. House parties were a larger fixture of gay life in those days, in the 70s. I was the student program worker doing race relations work in the public schools at the time. Doug became a fixture of the Equal Opportunity Office. He was our general outstanding contract piecework person. So he pulled together Focus on Equality, which was the newsletter talking about work around racism and sexism and homophobia in the school system. He helped organize the South Africa conferences, the anti-apartheid conferences that were held every year. So when a major piece of work came up that other people weren't able to take on, Doug would be the person who would be hired to do that work.
Douglas published a book of his own poems through Stubblejumper Press, which was his own press. But when it came to creative writing, he sort of took a back seat to Peter. He was Peter's editor and advisor. So there would be the writing, but there would also be Peter's songwriting. And again, Douglas didn't do the songwriting, but he was his advisor and was a big part of that process.
Well, they were both really creative people. Peter was more, I guess, more artsy, and Doug more journalistic. What was needed was a much more on-the-surface, left-wing kind of media. And so Pink Ink and Wright subsequently tried to do that.
One thing that Doug brought to both Pink Ink and to Wright's magazine, which is really important to remark on, is that he was very committed to not simply focusing on Toronto or even the larger urban centers. He always carried with him a much more cross-country focus, obviously with real connections in the prairies. He was the type of gay activist who was not simply just committed in a narrow sense to gay or lesbian concerns. He was committed to feminism, to progressive forms of social change. He was quite involved in human rights work more generally, and was also quite involved in Central American solidarity work with struggles that were then going on in Nicaragua and El Salvador when he was in Toronto. Because he was working not only in the gay community, but also in the human rights scene, doing race relations advisory work with the Toronto Board of Education, and also doing Central American solidarity work, that he came in contact with a number of activists in the NDP. So it seemed logical that he would be asked to run as a candidate. He was well respected in the gay community and the progressive scene, and obviously in some NDP circles as well.
Well, it was just very natural for Doug because he's always involved in so many things. Well, they'd asked him, I think they'd asked him several times if he would run for the nomination. And so he finally decided to run. He phoned and asked me what I thought. And I said, great, great.
Friends, the next election will be the most important one of our lifetimes. We must fight this so-called free trade deal that threatens everything that we have built in this country as progressive, socialist Canadians.
To some extent, Doug was still bringing to it lots of enthusiasm and exuberance, but I sort of felt a little bit like he'd spent too much time at the Ed Broadbent training school for how to be a candidate, because he was mentioning Ed Broadbent all the time. It was like he was just taking up the sort of NDP line on how to run in the elections and losing himself in the process, and I sort of felt that he'd lost something significant there.
We must end the pervasive violence and poverty that threaten too many women in our society. We must expand our commitment to affordable public housing.
He was always busy, always pressed for time, lived on nothing. And I go into his place, his desk was piles and piles of paper, and he knew where everything was, but...
We must address the multitude of environmental threats facing us, like toxic waste, pollution, and mindless development, before it's too late. We must guarantee quality care for our loved ones living with AIDS and focus on research and development of medication to help put an end to the AIDS epidemic.
And he had a persistent little cough that they kind of ignored. And he was so focused on the election that he really wasn't, he may have not been taking care of himself well enough. Well, he campaigned right up until he collapsed, until they took him to the hospital, and he came this close to dying.
Well, Peter phoned me that morning and told me that Doug had collapsed, and I asked him if, there's a possibility he might have AIDS, and he said, we don't know yet. And when I went in, the doctor had just been in to see Doug, and he's just lying there in bed, and he looked at me and he just said, yeah, I have it.
Sodom.
Joyful.
In the frenzy of goats and dogs.
Gorged in the sweet flesh.
Of harlots and boys.
A city of shadow. Warm breath. Flesh on flesh. A cacophony. A carnival. A celebration.
Ended only by the dark laughter of a destroyer god.
No, they had no idea. Neither of them knew that they were HIV positive. Pete was probably tested outside the hospital, and Doug found out when he was in the hospital. It was devastating. They had no idea. Probably over a period of time it changed the dynamic because they had to be very careful with their health. We used to party a lot and have a good time, and they had to really pull back on that.
He went through a period of real ambivalence about how being positive, having AIDS, was going to position him in the world. But I think it was, it almost killed him to keep up the pretense of running in this election when he was so very ill. And Doug said, he had been really reluctant to start doing work around AIDS because he didn't want to be known as a one-issue person. And his politics was much broader. But in the middle of that talk, he broke down and said, and then I almost died. And then I began to realize that, in fact, this had to be part of my politics and part of my life. That fall was the year that we started AIDS Action Now. And it was a reflection of the growing militancy of people with AIDS. So that early AIDS activism was an attempt to actually organize people who are HIV positive to get our needs met.
There was really no treatment, and they knew that. They pretty much knew it was a death sentence. And little by little, they both got sicker and sicker, so it was a little bit like watching them just waste away.
Ba-doo, ba-doo. Ba-ba-doo, ba-doo, ba-doo, day, wa-ba-doo, ba-doo, ba-ba-doo, ba-doo-doo-doo. My life has been like an ashtray. You remind me of an ashtray. I feel like a full ashtray thanks to you. It's ashes I portray.
He said, this is a journey, just like every other part of life. It's a journey, and we'll make the best of it. And I'm not going to die from this, he said. You know that I'm not going to die from this. He really focused a lot on Peter, and that took a lot out of him. He was already losing a lot of weight, and he really looked after Peter that last year before Peter died. Well, Peter was, I think, diagnosed in January, and he died in September.
Remind me of an ashtray. I feel like a full ashtray thanks to you. It's ashes I portray. Will somebody empty this ashtray? Will somebody empty this ashtray? Will somebody empty this ashtray?
There is a sweet, soft pain when an angel enters your heart. The point of departure, when the creature leaves, is not marked by a scar, but by a small, singing wound. There is no healing.
It was Peter's dream to write a trilogy, so Douglas finished that for him. I think he felt he could take that on. He could, that would be his gift to Peter, would be to finish his trilogy.
He went to Saskatchewan to the writer's retreat there. I've seen it written that Peter had the whole outline for the third book, and Doug just filled it in, but he didn't really. He talked to Doug about how he wanted to continue it on, and Doug, he really poured himself into that. There was a lot of anger in that book because he was very angry at Peter's family. Not the whole family, his mother. Doug was pretty understanding of most people, but he didn't like Peter's mother. She had promised help when Peter was ill, and that never came through, and that really came out in the book. So when we sent it away to the publisher, we wanted to hear back whether it was going to be published, but he never knew that it was going to be. I think we heard a few days after he passed away.
How would I describe Doug? He was gentle, he was articulate, he was passionate, he was obsessed.
Well, he was, you know, he was a communicator. He was an advocate for, you know, people who didn't have anybody to advocate for them.
Just always fair and always tried to look at the good in people before judging them. That was the one thing about Doug, you know, you had to walk in somebody else's shoes before you could judge.
He could be maddening. He was all of those things. And he had a really big heart.
Yeah, his legacy is his fans, I think. People that loved him all over the world.